Welcome back to another episode of the Minot Business Podcast presented by Bennett Creative Media. If you've been enjoying our series of business interviews, don't forget to rate and review. It really helps us bring insightful conversations to your ears. I'm your host, Easton Bennett, and on the show today, we have Derek Olson, a local filmmaker, part-time MSU instructor, and overall creative dude. Derek, it's good to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me, Easton. I'm really happy to be here.
It's going to be a good conversation. That was the third intro that I went through. Guys, it's been a little bit since we posted one of these episodes. I'm going to get back on the weekly schedule, so appreciate you guys bearing with me. Episodes are coming, and Derek is going to kick us off into that episode train. It's been about a month since we posted, but Derek, you're officially kicking us off.
Starting a deluge of content.
Yep, a deluge. What does that mean?
It's like a waterfall.
Oh, I like that.
Standing under a waterfall.
I'm going to have to add that to my arsenal. I like to think of myself as a wordsmith, but I've never heard of that one.
Okay.
So Derek, for the people that don't know, we kind of gave you a little intro there at the beginning, local filmmaker, part-time MSU instructor, creative dude. For the people that have never met you, they don't know what you do, what's your shtick?
Oh, that's interesting because I think coming up with a shtick has been sort of one of the more difficult parts of being a creative person, because when you're a creative person, and not that I'm speaking for everybody, but I think it's sometimes tough to be a self promoter, right? So we want to focus all of our attention on our creations and the thing that we're putting our focus on. And sometimes you have to take a step back and say, look at me, I'm a big time guy or whatever. And that sort of the eyes on you can make you uncomfortable if that's, if you're more inclined toward, being someone who likes to work privately or, work on his thing and then just show the thing and not necessarily be the center of attention. So. It's
very interesting, the dynamics between the whole influencer culture right now, where everyone wants to post on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, and everyone wants to be a YouTube star. And then I actually saw a tweet the other day that I don't know if they still call them tweets now. That's X. But
I saw an X the other day.
Yeah, I saw an X the other day, and someone was saying, "This is your friendly reminder that you don't have to be an influencer. Like you can do your job. Let's say filmmaking. We're both in the filmmaking space. You can just be a filmmaker, create your projects, and not self-promote. Because I think that's one of the hardest things is that self-promotion.
Yeah, and sometimes we feel like we're being pulled from two different directions. One, feeling like I got to create more, but then the other being like I have to be on camera more or get in front of audiences more or in front of groups of people. And I mean, honestly, there is probably a balance that needs to be struck with both of those things if you really want to succeed. So I think about sometimes and try to even like envision this, like how much pressure it must be for somebody, like say like a Martin Scorsese or one of these guys that's more of like a director, but then he has to go on, say the Jimmy Fallon show or Stephen Colbert or something like that and just be funny in that moment. And that's just such an entirely different skill set than he's probably used to having. But the great ones can do both, And so it is something that, as I've gotten older, I'm like, what, if there was certain times where I could have stepped on stage and maybe just sort of commanded that attention, how would things have been a little different in terms of the eyeballs that got on my work? Yeah. Which is the ultimate goal.
What do you think as far as then social media wise? So we talked about, going on actual shows and maybe on stage to a live audience. What about social media? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think what you're doing is perfect, where you can find sort of a form and function together where it doesn't come across as something like, look at me or narcissistic or whatever, because firstly, you're interviewing somebody and you're informing the audience and it's about something you're passionate about or, So all of these things kind of converge to there's an authenticity there. You know what I mean? So I think everybody just has to kind of look for where their authenticity is, where it's hiding. Sometimes it's just, you have to look inward, not outward, right? Yeah. So a lot of times we go on YouTube and it's like, do this, do that, hit this check mark, that check mark, and you're going viral or whatever. But in reality, I think it's more of a deep search within to find out what's interesting and unique about you. And then what you find out when you go in front of an audience is that you're not as quote unquote interesting and unique as you thought, but at the same time, now you have something in common with this group of people that are out there that you never would just find. And it's not a bad mark against Minot being a small town, for instance, but there's just only so many people here. And let's say you're, have a 1 in 1,000 sort of interest or whatever. Well, there might be, 42 people in town that could share it. Well, you got to find them and they got to be somewhat in your demographic. They can't be a teenager if you're, you know what I mean? So there's just a lot. Is finding community online is just an amazing set of possibilities. But I think that in the modern times now I'm going off on a tangent here, but
hey, that's what the show is about, man. Tangents.
I feel like it's all about sort of optimization. And I think we can really get lost in this optimization element where we're sort of chasing dragons a little bit, where it's like, well, if you present it like this, if you present it like that, and then you go on YouTube and it's just, everything's like brain hacks. It's like clickbait times 10. So then you're like clicking on stuff you don't even really want to watch. And then it's an hour long and you're like, oh God, get this content away from me. It's just kind of sticks to you in a way. And it's like, I almost have to stay away from YouTube sometimes just because it doesn't feel productive. And it just feels like a loop that you get your brain stuck in.
It's easy to fall down that rabbit hole.
Right. And then also like sometimes it's like, okay, well, you want to make content, but then you also got to think about the medium, right? So YouTube is the medium is the message to an extent, right? So that's like a very common sort of phrase or whatever, but it makes sense because, okay, let's say you want to make, I don't know, let's say a sketch comedy show. Well, now is YouTube anymore the place for that? You know what I mean? It was in a certain time period, but now it seems more like they don't reward that as much as they might reward, like say a 48-minute documentary about Nazis or something like that. You know what I mean? So then it's like everything's 48-minute documentaries about Nazis and there's no more sketch comedy on there. So sometimes optimization, I feel like isn't exactly the best move, for making something enjoyable as a platform.
Well, and that's where people might get caught up in that optimization game where it's like, how can this piece make me money, or how can this move the needle?
Absolutely. Yeah. And especially if you get into a place of neediness where you're like, okay, well, I know that if I say like, I don't know, some inflammatory thing about politics or something, that I know I'm going to get a certain amount of eyeballs. And then if you veer away from that, you won't get those eyeballs. So you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to do the sort of value assessment here of what I'm getting for what I'm putting in. If I'm putting in all these time, I want the eyeballs. So pretty soon you're just spouting off about politics and then like you've just gone down like a whole other thing with your career you never really wanted to do.
You're doing it just because the audience will listen to it.
Right. And also because you're feeding YouTube what YouTube wants to eat. It's like you can't give it vegetables. You got to give it sugar because that's all it wants.
Yep. It's like us.
Yeah.
I don't want vegetables. I'll tell you that much. So you mentioned Minot being a little bit smaller, which is 100% true. It might be harder to find your audience. You have a little bit of a background. You didn't always live in Minot. Give me kind of the rundown of what your path looks like.
So my path, I think, is really interesting because I'm kind of, in a way, an accidental filmmaker. So, right. And all these things just happened by following my interest and confluence events and stuff like that. So I wouldn't even have dreamed of being a filmmaker as like, say, an 18-year-old. Like I wouldn't have thought that's a possibility. But this is like before YouTube and all this other stuff. And, maybe you would be able to like read a filmmaking magazine, but I didn't even know like where to subscribe to that magazine. You know what I mean? So there just wasn't information and it all seemed like a dream. And when I watched movies, I was just like, how in the hell could they do that? Like, that's so amazing. You know what I mean? They just made that whole thing explode or whatever. Like that looked so real. Like, how is that even possible? So it just seemed wildly unrealistic that I would be in the filmmaking world. But I also have this sort of thing in my brain where when I see something like that, where I don't understand it, I have this need to understand
Figure it out.
Yeah. I'm just like, I can't just live in the uncomfortability of not understanding how that works.
Before you got into the filmmaking industry, would you look at movies? Because I know I do this now. I look at movies and I automatically think, oh, what's the camera movement like? How did they light this? Well, the blocking. Did you used to do that or not?
I got into doing that, but only after I took a class, maybe like when I was 20 at a community college that was like a film class.
Yeah.
And that's when I started even understanding that there was a grammar to film. So before that, it was all movie magic. And to some extent, I think guys like us, we have to sort of lament when that magic went away because we started getting into the actual practicality of it.
Yeah.
And so now we're like, when we see it, we're like, oh, well, that effect was created that way. You know what I mean? And all of this is kind of like, oh, that cutaway right there shows that that's a whole new setup now. Or they're in a different location than they were like 5 seconds ago. We can just see all that. But before, we really suspended disbelief a lot more than, we're even capable of doing now. But I enjoy it more on this level. I enjoy it more on the sort of like dissecting it level than I really did as the magic level. So I think you have to be that kind of personality because for some people, losing the magic, I think, would feel like a loss.
It's almost like our Roman Empire, you could say. A lot of people are going on about the Roman, how everyone's thinking about the Roman Empire, but people going, maybe you really like sports cards. You know a ton about sports cards, and you're like, oh, well, this is graded at a 10 because of this. Yep. Or maybe you know a ton about cooking, like, oh, this is how you julienne, and when you julienne and cook it this way, it does this.
Yep.
Movies in film is like that for us, where it's like, oh, they shot that, super wide open, so it gave this effect, so it made the audience feel like this, or it's split lighting, so it made the person feel like a villain, whatever it might be.
And I always think like, oh man, I want to do that, or I can't wait to put that in a project, or you know what I mean. I'm just, they say like great artists steal or whatever. When it especially comes to like cinematography, like when I see great cinematography, I'm like, oh, I'm putting that in my next thing, like, just like they did it, And, I don't think it's cheating because the context is so different per each project. So it's really more like using a certain grammatical tool or a certain technique, that you're learning from being demonstrated. But there's nothing new under the sun when it comes to filmmaking, really. You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, stealing or borrowing or whatever, when it comes to creativity, I mean, you could come up with an idea today and make sure not to like execute on that idea, and you'll watch, if it's good, within the next 5 years, someone will have the exact same idea. And it's not because, and a really good friend of mine told me this one time about it, because I had a script that he was like, oh, this is so good. He goes, you have to get this out before someone does the exact same thing. Okay. And I was like, well, what do you mean? I'm only showed it to like you and 2 other people or whatever. And he goes,
I tweeted it.
Well, he goes, well, we all have the same influences. You know what I mean? So as much as like we might think, like I might think, oh, I'm a creative genius, I'm pulling this stuff out of a magic hat or whatever. We watched the same football game yesterday, or we watched the same movies, or we watched a lot of the same media. And you know what I mean? We're going to just come up with very similar creative ideas just because we're in this milieu, of our culture.
It might not be exactly the same, but it's going to be similar.
Yeah, exactly. Very similar. And so I've seen like jokes from my short movies make it in a feature film. And I'm like, did this guy watch my short film? Did he steal my joke? But in reality, he probably didn't. He probably just came up with the same joke. And then that can be like sort of complimentary to me if I think about it. I'm like, oh, like this guy who's like really succeeding had the same thought as me based on, you know what I mean? So it must mean I'm on some kind of right track, I guess. Yeah.
The one thing, going back to movies and how we kind of dissect things, the one thing I always like to ruin for people is when there's a conversation scene and you're looking at the overs. So for the people that don't know what an over is, basically you're shooting a person's face and then you're shooting over the other person's shoulder. So if the camera's behind my shoulder shooting at Derek, that's an over. You're looking at the person talking or reacting. And if that person is reacting, look at the person's mouth that's supposedly talking, because it never lines up. Yeah. Most of the times it does not line up with the actual words that are being said, because they're just taking a reaction cut or it's a little bit off, and it drives me insane. Yeah. And they mix all these different takes, but they'll take the audio from one and they'll put it over the video from another. And it's like, you're not going to notice. And nobody notices it until I point it out. So I've ruined this experience for all of you, and I'm happy that I did that. I actually just did it to my girlfriend last week. I was like, look at so-and-so's lips. Right. She's like, why would you point that out? Because it's annoying me and I want to know you too. What's his name's lips from the not Avengers movie, but the Justice League. Remember when they CGI'd out Henry Cavill's mustache? Oh, yeah. I brought that up to my dad. I'm like, did you notice anything weird about his mouth? And he's like, nah, it's fine. I'm like, no, they CGI'd out his mustache and they gave him like fake lips. And the whole thing looks so uncanny valley. But he's just like, it's fine. All that stuff, even like green screen stuff. I was watching The Blacklist probably a year ago, and it was during COVID, so they couldn't shoot a lot of stuff on location. And this guy was in a cemetery, and you could tell the background of the cemetery was so green screened. Right. Nobody said anything about it. And I was like, what's going on right now? I was like, this looks so incredibly fake. Yeah. But yeah, that's the things you dissect. Right. So you're in LA. What is some of the stuff you're doing out there? We're producer. Did you learn a lot out there? When did you move there? What's that story like? So I kind of did everything. I did almost every on-set job possible over the course of like 14, 15 years. You have a favorite? I do, and I'll get into that a little bit later. I don't want to jump too far ahead. So,
But there was like, I would say sort of like a pivotal moment for me. And that would probably be sort of like my favorite. And I was still pretty young. So I started out wanting to be a news reporter, but like a really good one, you know, an investigative journalist from the movies, you know, at the New York Times, and doing like big hard hitting stuff. And I had a whole like fantasy built in my head about that.
Like a Nightcrawler?
Yeah. And that was the trajectory that my career was going to go on. And it did for a few years, but I found myself quickly burning out. And I just felt like I was working too hard for what the payoff was. And I also felt like, you know, like I would work for 2 months on a story. I got a job at the OC Weekly, which was LA Weekly and OC Weekly. And in Orange County, it was sort of their alternative weekly newspaper. And those things kind of barely exist nowadays, but they're still in LA, and it was owned by like Village Voice Media. And I was high on my career thing and like self-identifying as a journalist almost more than even like a guy from North Dakota, you know,
which is
like,
awesome.
Yeah.
For you at the point, right?
It was, but then as I started like mulling over like whether I was actually happy or not, and like what my lifestyle was, because I would work like 60 hours a week, and I was like all by myself in Orange County, and it was like work till like 8 p.m. and then I would go to the gym, and then I would like eat Chipotle every single night for dinner. And
is
then
working that much a part of the journalism like landscape? Is that just kind of how it is?
Well, you can go two routes. You can be the sort of workaholic journalist, and then you can, you know, try to claw your way up the greasy pole of success or whatever.
Yep.
But then also you can be the sort of person who finds their lane and knows exactly what the bare minimum is.
Yeah.
And can kind of like scooch through.
Yeah.
But I would say that that's less nowadays because the leanness of the journalism industry, in that let's say they used to employ like, I don't know, 27,000 people. I'm pulling that number out of a hat. But now they employ 11,000 people. You know what I mean? So like the same machine is being operated by 45% of the individuals that used to run it. And I think that's one of the myriad problems with media today, but it's definitely a huge contributor.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I felt that I was being overworked and underpaid, and there were situations there where I'd be doing an investigative report, and I felt like I was also being like encouraged to do dangerous stuff.
Okay.
So like
it's never good.
Yeah, there was this one reporter who was reporting on the sheriff of Orange County, who was a guy that was undergoing a lot of like corruption trials and stuff. And so he would start to get intimidated by the police. Like they flew to his apartment and had a helicopter outside his window and were spotlighting in his window at 2:00 in the morning. And then they would try to like get him to meet them in parking garages at 2 a.m. and stuff. Man. And he had all these stories about they were basically out to get him, you know what I mean? And I'm like, okay, well that makes me very paranoid. So I ended up on this story where it was about this taxi driver who was kidnapped, and they like spray painted his hands orange, which like meant something for the Mexican cartel or something like that. And they were like marked him for death, but somehow he escaped this garage and then came to the police, and then the police wouldn't like arrest the guy.
Okay.
So, and so I'm like trying to get to the bottom of like, why won't the police arrest the guy, and blah, 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 blah. And so I remember my editor being like, just go over there and ask him. You know? It's like, you mean the Mexican cartel member who tied this guy up in a garage and like was gonna kill him? Yeah. Like I go to his house and knock on the door and ask him.
Sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, and it was just stuff like that. And then like this guy who was also like my source was like really like harassing me and just calling me at all hours of night. And he's like from Iran. Yeah. And he actually had pictures of himself with like Fidel Castro and the Shah of Iran. And he had this whole story where he like worked for the CIA and all this other stuff. And I just really felt myself getting like deeper into something that wasn't worth like $45,000 a year. And like nobody was going to give me a pay raise. And it's just like, why am I even like putting myself in these situations?
Like, I feel like I'm going to get on a list somehow.
Right, exactly. And then also, like, I would have these stories I was really proud of. For instance, one, I reported on this woman who had left this cult called the Children of God in Huntington Beach. If anybody wants to look this up, they're just pervs. Like, they had this, like, idea of, like, mixing sexuality and Jesus. Let's just say that. And it was really like some of their literature was so like messed up, and I had like actually look at it and stuff like that. But they would, and I mean, I don't want to get too deep into that, But like I did this story that involved this woman leaving, and then she needed to get her 3 children out of this cult, but her husband was still like die hard. And he's like, no, my children are not leaving this cult. But she had no money because she'd been born and raised in it, had no education. She was basically like lost, lost cult member. And through my reporting, I was able to, I guess, touch the heart of an attorney who decided to take on her case and got those children out of the cult, and I'm like, oh, so that's like one of those things where it's like through my work, I like saw this great result happen, so that's
awesome.
Yeah. So things like that, I think, definitely make me feel proud of my journalism career, but also at the same time, I was just physically unhappy with, what I was, how much time I was.
The lifestyle.
The lifestyle and the stress. And I was really under a lot of stress. So anyways, so
when was the pivot into film then? So
the pivot into film was a little bit long time coming in that there's like a year and a half in between where I was just lost and didn't know what to do. But I had an opportunity to continue my journalism career in Arlington, Virginia.
Okay.
And so I was like, okay, am I moving to Virginia from Southern California to like stay on this path? And it was for the Air Force Times, actually.
Okay.
And or do I just stay here in Southern California where I'd like made friends and kind of gotten used to it, and then also been living in this endless summer, right? Yeah. And I got a little spoiled by that, and I'm like, you know what? I don't know what I'm gonna do in LA, but I like the region and I feel comfortable here, and so I just decided like, if I can't continue my journalism career, it's still worth it to stay here. I'd rather just be here doing something else than be there doing journalism.
Yeah.
So in that time off, I ended up becoming like a valet parking attendant, which was pretty cool because I would end up parking like famous people's cars, right? And
that's awesome.
Yeah. And one time, for instance, I was at some sort of industry event, and I remember I'm driving this 1962 Volkswagen, right? And just like someone had, a classic Volkswagen that had been restored. It was actually in really good shape, but it's definitely a 1962 Volkswagen in the inside. And I remember I'm driving real slow, and there's like people standing there. And all of a sudden I look at this guy and he goes, "It's a classic," and I look at him close and I'm just like, huh? And then like 3 seconds later, my brain was like, oh, that was Val Kilmer.
No way.
And he has like long hair, like in the doors. This is like 2009 or 8 or something.
Yeah. And
he was still like very healthy, very just looking exactly like Val Kilmer. And then I had to park the car, and then I had to like go run past him, and then I'm like just kind of like stopped, and I'm listening to his conversation, and he's talking to some girl, and he goes, yeah, I'm staying at, actually, where am I staying right now? And like, he was just like living his life, living on couches or something at that point, which was, I guess, not what you would think.
Val Kilmer's
2009 Val Kilmer. I think he was maybe like using a lot of substances or something at that point.
That's crazy, man. That's awesome.
But so there was that, and then I would just like see different Hollywood parties. Then I parked like Johnny Knoxville's car, and the guy who plays or Topher Grace.
Okay.
And I mean, like, just go to a party and it'll be like, oh, Spike Jones, you know what I mean? Like, just parking these guys' cars. But the thing is, like, something about just being close and seeing them as humans and being treated like a human just made me realize, like, these are just like, these are people that work in the creative industry.
That's what I was going to ask. If it's like, now that you're around it, if it's like, well, it's normal. They're regular people like us.
Yeah. What's not normal was my reaction, right? Because I'm just like, like, oh my gosh,
it's Val Kilmer.
Yeah, and what I liken it to is like watching like Mickey Mouse walk into a room. You know what I mean? Like, in full animation, Mickey Mouse walks into a room and it's you'd be like, oh my God, like there's a fictional character in the room. Like, I thought you were not real. Yeah. And now I have to deal with the fact that you are a real thing, Yeah. And so that's kind of like going on in your head. But eventually I sort of got over that because I was just, around a lot of famous people when I was in LA over the course of time or whatever. Yeah. And so I got to the point where I could like essentially act like myself around them. And that was, I guess, some sort of breakthrough. So I have like a couple of friends that are like semi-famous actors and stuff like that, I can call and talk to or whatever. And that's just sort of like a weird thing that, I don't know. It's like weirdly you feel kind of proud of it. It's like, I know this person and I can call them. Like, they'd probably be like, why the hell are you calling me? But at the same time, I can call them if I want to.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Right.
So before we get into a little bit more on your experience, we're going to hear from this week's sponsor, Midco. Is your business moving up and to the right? Put Midco's business technology to work for you so you never have a slow day at the office. From premium internet and phone plans to custom private networking and advertising, they have a solution for every type of business, large or small. Get paired with an account representative to create your suite of services and make the switch with ease with dedicated business client fulfillment and support teams. No data caps, flexible contracts with month-to-month or long-term options, built-in DDoS protection, and more. Explore services and request a free consultation at midco.com/business today. All right, Derek, so I want to hop back into one of the questions I had. What was it like, and maybe people that are listening can use this for other industries too, but you went into the film industry. What was it like breaking into the industry? Do you have any advice for how you break into an industry having no experience, no nothing?
Right. For me, it was being that I had no experience. I just came in pretty humbly. And when I think about the emotions that I went through, I think it was a growth opportunity for me because really when I came into being a journalist, like there's a certain power to that is a little bit addictive, right? So part of it is like, okay, let's say I'm talking to, a representative of a company or let's say a politician or somebody who is sort of thought of as important. Well, there have been times where I sort of like felt the power dynamic shift when I started asking them questions.
Yeah.
Right. And suddenly I'm in charge.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm 25 and you're 60 something politician, but I'm making them sweat.
Yeah.
Right. And so there was something about that. And then when I would call and be like, I'm a journalist and
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, well now I park cars or now I'm, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, so I had to like deal with the ego drop of that. And then also realize how much of my ego was built around this construction of being a journalist or filling this role in society and how much I'd attached my identity to that. Mm-hmm. And so I had to sort of like detach and become just plain old Derek again. And so there was a process there, and where like, for instance, I didn't like if someone I felt like was talking down to me or condescending to me or something like that, I'd be like, how dare you? Yeah. But I got a little bit cooler with that kind of stuff, and especially putting it in the context of like, we're getting something done here. So just like, listen, and
it's not personal.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Right. And so that I think process allowed me, once I went through that, to start from the bottom.
Okay.
And just be like, you know what? I just don't have any experience in this industry. And so it's okay for me to be the lowest paid guy on the staff and for me to be in the learning position, sort of in the student position.
Yeah.
And that was hard to do, but also, that was necessary.
Yeah.
And so once I could kind of dial back that identification with being a professional and be back to be like, I'm just a learner now.
How do you think you do that?
I mean, you do it by just doing self-work and just realizing that your constructed identity is just like, it's just, you just attach to something.
I feel like it's all mental,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's an element of it of just like humility or shame or something like that, where you sort of feel like, like you deserve more than you're getting, or how am I being this way? Anyways, I don't want to get too deep into that, but basically coming at from a perspective of being like, you know what, I'm going to like delete 10 years off my age to an extent. Cause I'm like 28 and I'm coming into this with a lot of preconceived notions, but I'm just like, I'm going to be 18 again. Yeah. So when I started as a production assistant. And that's sort of like a good gateway into working in movies and TV, because there's not a lot of really required knowledge. Mm-hmm. A lot of times to get a PA position in like a good production, you sort of have to have a bachelor's, but not always. And in fact, that's if you're like an untrained guy, a bachelor's will help you get that. But if you already have some PA experience, then the bachelor's doesn't matter anymore. Yeah. So it's kind of like you can sort of choose whether or not it's worth it to you, because you might make more strides in 1 year of being like an on-the-ball PA than you would 4 years of college plus 1 year. You know what I mean? If you didn't have the right attitude.
I always have that conversation with people about experience. Like all of these, documents and college degrees and certifications are awesome, but I still think experience is the number one thing.
Right.
If you go into a job, let's take it to the highest level, a doctor, which I think every doctor should go to college, and please go to college so you don't mess me up. But if you go into a hospital and you say, hey, I want to be a surgeon. And they say, well, what are your requirements? So you're like, well, I don't have a degree, but I performed 450 surgeries and never messed one up.
Right.
They're going to be like, I don't know how that's possible. And this is maybe obviously a stretch of what can actually be done, but having that experience just proves your track record, whether you have the pieces of paper that say that or not.
Right. And luckily, unlike the medical profession, we don't need a license to do what we're doing. And so much of creativity is subjective or whatever. Like one person's great movie is another person's just flop, or schlock or whatever. And so I had started living in this hostel.
Okay.
And so it was like a hotel, but it's like a bunch of people in bunk beds, and it cost like $30 a night. And it was like, some people were sort of like European travelers, and then others were just people that couldn't afford an apartment in LA or whatever. And I didn't end up there because I was like dead broke or anything. I just had this really like bad roommate situation, and I didn't have a lot of time to find a place. So I just found this place. And then when I got there, I'm like, I'm just going to prepay 2 months and I'll be out of here in 2 months.
Yeah.
But then they were like, well, we need someone to work here, and all you have to do is help people out by telling them what's going on, and change a bed here and there, and it's really easy, and you can live here for free. So I'm like, oh, great.
Let's go.
It's perfect. Now I don't have to pay rent anymore.
Yeah.
And so I ended up living there for like 18 months. But one time this girl came through, her name is Candace, and she was a second AC or first AC, it was assistant camera. Yeah. And she was going to do a feature film. And I was like, oh, I want to work in the movies. And I just kind of like said that, and she's like, oh, well, why don't you just come and work on this thing? We're looking for people for PA right now. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, what's that? What? Yeah. And so I ended up emailing these people. She gave me the email, or it was like a Facebook group or something like that. And they're like, yeah, come on. It starts at 6 a.m. and goes till 10 p.m., and it's for 30 days. And I'm like, great. Yeah. And so I did that. But as just a week or so into it, I started just kind of working with the head gaffer and being his sort of assistant gaffer.
And for the people that don't know, gaffing is the lighting in a movie.
Yep. And so he was always really busy and always doing stuff. And PAing, it's like they got like 8 PAs. Yeah. And you'd be sitting there with a walkie-talkie, just like sitting there for like 4 hours doing nothing. And I'm like, this is terrible. I want to be working on the movie like everybody else, not just watching them. And so I asked the gaffer if he needed help. And this was the key grip said this to me. He goes, look at Ken over there. He's working so hard, and they don't even have a budget for an assistant for him. And, if you went over there and started volunteering to assist, he'd probably let you. And I'm like, oh, really? Okay.
Sick.
Yeah. And so, he's over there explaining like, oh, this is what a cardellini is. And this is what and so he's just teaching me like all the things. And I'm like, oh, this is really turned into a learning experience, something else. And after a week, then the producer would notice that I was doing this, and he goes, actually, we gave him a budget for an assistant, and he is just pocketing it.
Bring one.
And they're like, well, you can't take one of our PAs then, because we want our PAs or whatever. So they're like, you got to go back to being a PA. And I'm just like, no,
I'm good.
No, I don't like it. And so then I talked to him about it, and he decides to bring his like buddy in. So his buddy's going to be his assistant, and I'm back off the floor, right? So I'm like, oh, this sucks. So then I went and talked to that key grip again, and then he let me be on the grip crew instead.
Oh, okay.
So now I spent half the movie as an electrician. Now I'm the other half as a grip.
Yeah.
And so, and these guys were like really cool, and like just the vibe, right? Like just the fact that like these are like super cool people like making a movie, and it's like not only what we're doing. And to me, it was just the ultimate adult version of playing in a sandbox. You know what I mean? I'm like, wait, I'm grown up, but I get to play for a living. Yeah. This is like the career for me. And so I overheard the key grip saying to the best boy, and that's like your number 2. If you're a key grip, you have a best boy. And he goes, yeah, I've got this is a great job opportunity. It's at Smashbox Studios, and it's a really cool commercial studio, and you got like famous people coming in all the time shooting all this stuff and blah blah blah. It's such a good experience. And the guy, his name's Wyatt. He goes, nah, I just want to be an actor. And he's the best boy. He's not even acting on the thing, but he really wants to be an actor, and he's just best boying because it's like to make money for rent. Yeah. And he's like, if I take a full-time job, I feel like that'll interfere with my acting career. Yeah. And I'm just like, I want the job.
You're like, I'll do it.
Yeah. And he's like, what? And he's like, I want that job that you just offered to him. I want that. Yeah. And he's like, I didn't think you'd want it or something like that. I'm like, what made you think that? Like, you didn't even think about me, you know, but it's okay. I'm not going to you know, confront you about it, but give me that job. You know, it's open, right?
It's mine now, right?
And he's like, yeah. Just talk to this guy and he'll juice you in. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, juice me? What the fuck is that? Yeah. And so anyways, I talked to him and he's like, okay. He's coming for an interview. You start on Monday or whatever. Yeah. So then I got into this job as a stage manager at Smashbox Studios, which is now Coyote Studios. But it's the same ownership group. They just changed their name because they had a partnership with Smashbox Cosmetics at the time. And they don't have that partnership anymore, but now they're Coyote Studios, which is still a famous studio in LA but not maybe like as famous as like MGM. But if you're in LA, you know Coyote for sure. You always see their trucks and everything. So that was like where I got a lot of my knowledge about how the industry works. And it was like, they were shooting commercials in there every day, and they were shooting covers and like interstitials and things for promotion. So like, for instance, the new season of Modern Family would be coming out, and then they would have the whole cast of Modern Family in there, and they'd be there sitting on couches for like a week, and it'd be like Al Bundy, and I'd see him on the way. I'd be walking into work, and I'm like, oh, this is fucking Al Bundy right there. Yeah. And so that was pretty fun, and just led to different experiences. So without going into the whole narrative or whatever, that was just sort of how I got in, was just saying, I want that. And just being in that right place at the right time in both situations. The one was just like, oh, I'm gonna make a movie. I'm like, me too. Can I do it too?
I think that's something people can take from this. If you're trying to go into a career path, and I know a lot of times we have business owners on here that are starting whatever it is, but even if you're going into a specific field, you have to go out there and grab it for yourself, because people aren't just going to hand it for you. Right. Just like Derek said, you know, he went and he said, hey, I want that job. He overheard, he was eavesdropping a conversation, overheard it and just said, I want that job. Just like he went and talked to was it the gaffer that you talked to? Were you working under him?
Oh,
and then he brought in the assistant.
Yeah, first I was working for the gaffer. Yeah, and then he brought his buddy in, and then I went to, and I'm like, I don't want to go back to PA, so I got to be the second grip or whatever.
So you just got to go out there and you got to take the bull by the horns,
right? And also, I mean, and only in retrospect do I really see this. I don't know if I saw it at the time, but in both situations, there was a need that somebody needed to fill, right? Yeah. And that's the thing about any industry you want to be in, is there actually is always a need for like competent, good people in it. So really, if you're a competent person who's a good worker, you can go into any industry. You just have to, put your best foot forward, go in there, all the cliches or whatever, but somebody needs you. Somebody's like, oh, if we could only get like someone to fill this position, it's killing me in almost anything, So often, even times when I'm on set, and a lot smaller than stuff that's happening in LA, but I'm always thinking, man, it'd be nice if we had someone to do this. Right. And if someone just happened to show them, they're like, hey, I'll do that, or whatever it might be. I mean, I have a couple of buddies that just came on, and I was like, I need an extra hand, doing PA stuff, right? Just moving stuff around, moving carts and stuff. And then they come into a bigger role where it's like, oh, now you know what lighting actually is, you can do some lighting stuff. So it's all about that opportunity. So I just thought of one other thing, not to be interruptive. No, you're good. But like, I was thinking about this key grip, Dave Santana, that I met on that thing. And one of the really big pieces of advice he gave me, and I always try to apply it. It's like, and I try to do this when I'm working with you too. So like, for instance, he's just like, look at, like the person who's, doing the thing, and just try to read their mind. You know what I mean? Like, think, like if they're looking at something, look at what they're looking at, and like, think what they probably are thinking, and then go do the thing, so that they, don't even have, it's like as you're just reading their mind, I like that. And another thing he would do is he would have little things like, for instance, if he wanted something cleaned up, he'd look at me, and then he'd go, ksh, ksh, and then he'd walk away. And that just meant that he needed, like, he wanted to like spray away. That's the way he's like, ksh, ksh. And that's awesome. That's it. So I'm gonna start doing that to my dishes and see if they just disappear. There's no one even in there. I just spray and hopefully come back and they're done. I do like that though. Try to anticipate what they're actually needing. Yeah. Because even when I used to email a bunch of people and DM a bunch of people to do like free work and just try to get my name out there, I would try to send them a message, provide value right away, where it's like, I'm not going to ask you, hey, what can I help you with? I'm going to tell you what you need help with. Right. Or if you're on set or something or whatever it is, and
the camera person standing there and they need help with a tripod or they're struggling, just go help them,
Right.
You see the problem, you fix it before asking.
Yep. And that's one of the reasons it's so good to have experienced people on set, because we know that it's sometimes harder to explain, or takes longer to explain something than to do it ourselves.
Yeah.
And so you get into the habit of doing everything yourself, and then you kind of really can't like scale up because you're just micromanaging and controlling everything. So it's important to, I guess have people that are already thinking. The gears are turning. Yep. They're not just like waiting for the next instructions. Or
that's where you're looking for people with the what's the skill? Not quantitative, qualitative skill, maybe, where it's more so intuition rather than here's exactly. I know that's number. It's probably not exactly right, but something
I think I see your point.
Yeah. So let's pivot a little bit to Minot then. So you went to LA. Now you're back here in Minot. What was that transition like? And then maybe talk to me a little bit about what the differences are, because things in LA are probably much bigger, grander scale, and now we're here.
Yep.
We're still. They're smaller crews, but we're still getting stuff done here. So tell me about that a little bit.
So for me, my fatigue with LA was sort of cumulative just over the years. It just like kept kind of annoying me to the point where like maybe the annoyances started to outweigh the benefits of that. And the pandemic really accelerated that. And then also, being single and following your career in a city like LA or New York is entirely a different experience than attempting to raise a family in those places, right? Yeah. So like, for instance, if you want to be single in LA, you can get a roommate. Me and you could be spending $700 a month on rent. All right. Yeah. Now you have 2 kids. Well, now you need a 3-bedroom and you got to pay for all of it. And it's $4,000, you know what I mean? Yeah. So that's just a rent. You're throwing that money down the toilet every single month, Yep. And then if you have 2 small children like I had, you've got to have daycare for them. And that's not, there's no assistance for that, especially if you like make too much money. So like every once in a while I'll be like, man, can I get some assistance or whatever? And it's like, how much money do you have to make to get assistance? It's like $30,000 a year or whatever. And anything below, you can get assistance. Anything above, it's like, well, if you only made $30,000 a year, good luck trying to have a family in Los Angeles. Like you won't even be able to feed yourself or even have a place to stay. So they have these sort of like, there's essentially no help for you if you like make over a certain amount, but like not enough that you're like really just able to have everything, that you want or whatever.
Well, and that's got to be so inflated compared to salaries in LA. You'd have the salary here in North Dakota, and then you have it in LA, and it's bottom of the barrel. Right,
what I mean? Exactly. So, for instance, like let's say $100,000 salary in LA would be sort of like a paycheck to paycheck situation. Yeah. If you're, unless you could find a way to like, have roommates and save money and stuff. But let's say that you're of a certain age and you want to have your own apartment and you want to have your own car and you want to have this and that. You know what I mean? Basically, you can't really, you sort of get forced into poverty unless, even if you make like 75,000 and then you look at your lifestyle, right? You're essentially living the lifestyle of a person in poverty in a place like LA. So you can't afford your own place. You know what I mean?
And it's just to live in LA.
Right.
Like you make $100,000 in North Dakota, you're doing fine.
Yeah, exactly. You can enjoy yourself, Yeah. So that's part of it, but I don't want to make it seem like that's all of it because the pandemic, like it really exacerbated a lot of problems that were already there, like the homelessness and stuff.
Yeah.
And so it does a certain thing to you psychologically, I would say, to live amongst people that are struggling that hard. Yeah. Right. So like I'm walking over passed out individuals who have soiled themselves on the sidewalk and I'm not stopping to help them.
Yeah.
But my everything inside me, it wants to be like, oh, call an ambulance, call the cops, call somebody. Let's get this person some help. Are they dead? Is this a dead body? You know what I mean? And it's like, what is happening? But you have to train yourself to ignore it, right? Because that's just, what are you going to do when there's thousands and thousands?
There's so many.
You can't do anything. You could just give all your money away, then you're going to be out there with them. You know what I mean? So there's just nothing you can do at an individual level to make any kind of impact. And that I think can have like a psychological effect on you, And for me, I think just growing up from here and the feelings I have about community and stuff like that, it was very antithetical, to just make the other invisible. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, that was part of it, but like, there's so many different things like that. You know, people complain about the traffic. Well, I had a situation for a number of years where I worked really close to where I lived and I didn't have traffic problems, you know, but then all of a sudden my work changed and now I've got to drive an hour and a half to like have essentially the same career, you know, and it's like, okay, well, this now like is remarkably ruined made my life suck more, you know, but in order to keep this, you know, these juggling balls in the air, I like have to, this is my new reality or whatever. Yeah. And so that, and then when the pandemic happened, essentially everything was shut down. Nobody was filming anything. So I kind of got stuck in sort of forced unemployment or whatever for a long period of time. And we homeschooled my son for kindergarten because the schools were closed down. I suppose, yeah. Yeah. And so a lot of that was like, man, I just want to breathe free again and just breathe free air and look out and just see the big prairie. Yep. You know what I mean?
And that's what you get here.
Yeah. Exactly. And I was yearning for that quite a bit. And I do really enjoy it. I'm a homeowner and I'm working at the university, which is like a really inspiring environment. You got all the different buildings you can go into. There's a cafe. There's like, they've got their sports teams and they're doing their thing in the background. And it's just like, wow, like this is a really cool environment to be in. And to work with students. Like I've never really had much chance to say, pass on the things that I've been learning. And there is a certain fulfillment to that. And then also as you do that, you then relive things that you just haven't thought about in so long, you know, so I can go back and even through this conversation, I'm going back and revisiting memories that I basically never, you know, look back on that, you know, I mean, very often.
And now they're going to be on the internet forever.
Right. Exactly. Now they're going to define me.
So let's talk maybe a little bit about MSU. You're instructing there now. Are you instructing film? That kind of in that realm?
Right. So I'm in the pro-com department, which probably is more in a way associated with my journalism background, which is really kind of a cool way that they came together in that. So I have all this filmmaking experience, but I just coincidentally have a background in journalism. Yeah. But that's the perfect fit for the pro-com department. Yeah. Because we do like for instance, we do a live show every Thursday. Yep. And it's the KMSU, it's on Channel 19 on Midco. If you guys have the Midco.
Midco sponsoring this episode, not a big deal.
Right. And so we're producing live TV. We're on November 28th, actually, one thing I want to plug, or November 30th, I'm sorry. Thursday, November 30th is the KMSU live auction. Okay. And I think this can kind of tie into the Minot Business Podcast too, because all of our sponsors are local Minot businesses. So I guess, for instance, I'll throw out an example that may or may not be true, but let's say Cookies for You has like a cookie bouquet, right? Yeah. And then we would sell that at the auction. Maybe you're going to get a really good deal on it versus what you would get normally. Yeah. And the money is going to go to like a charitable thing. Okay. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So we're doing something kind of for the community, but it's also like using all of our skills because we're doing it live on TV. We're going to have someone doing all the switching and just like it's a real live production. So, and it's all student run.
That's pretty awesome, man.
Yeah.
So then the filmmaking side, you're in Minot doing film here as well. We've worked on a couple projects together, which is exciting. How's that going here compared to, I don't want you to have to compare to LA, but you know, now that you're in Minot doing film, what's that like?
Well, I would say one difference is I think when I was in LA, it was really more about like, we'd be like, okay, we're making a comedy or we're making something that's going to be sort of, you know, the content was like less serious. Whereas I think the content here is more like commercial or, you know, like this business is offering this thing now, or this is, you know what I mean? And that's fine. It's just a little more commercialized, like obviously commercialized rather than being something ancillarily commercialized. So like we might be shooting that comedy video, but then like someone shoots like a Nerf gun, but it turns out Nerf like paid for the whole thing. Yeah. Right. But here you know, we'll be doing more, you know, like local businesses and doing social media content for them and stuff like that. And it's all the same skill set and the same mindset. A lot of it, it's just maybe like the seriousness of the content. I worked on like a lot of goofy content in LA, and a lot of it's like I look back on it and I'm like, it's kind of schlocky. Yeah. You know what I mean? But it was fun and you know, just had a lot of like wildness to it. And that's what I think, like, cause I also have, I've also on the other track is like my own creative career. So I've made like 12 short films.
I was gonna say that's what I was just about to go into.
Yeah, cool. We're on the same.
Yeah.
path.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about your background and what you've done creatively. And then also where you mentioned how Minot is now in the filmmaking industry, where you'd want it to go. Because one thing I will say, I don't think there's a ton of movies being shot in North Dakota as a whole, or Minot for that matter, but more short films. I'd like to see more of that stuff come from this area.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, we've got some plans, and I think we can foster that. And there's other creative guys in town that have done some stuff, like Adam Dias has done some creative films, and I think Eric Temke has as well, and Matt
Maldonado.
Maldonado. Yep. And so there's some guys that can do it. It's just, I think, a lot of times we get stuck, we're making money, we're doing business, we're doing this and we're doing that. And you have to understand, like, what we have to understand is that there may not be like a reward in the same way if we make a short film. Like, we might put our heart and soul into something and just like watch it fizzle before our eyes. You know what I mean? And that's just a reality of being a creative person. And the other thing is, the really truly heartbreaking thing is when you like objectively know you made a thing that's good, but just people don't want to look at it. You know what I mean? So it's like, no. If you'll just give this 10 minutes of your time, and they're like, no, I'm not going to give you 10 minutes of my time, but it's really good. It'll pay off. And so
that's where you kind of have to do those projects for yourself, especially, you're shooting a short film. You might just be paying for everything out of pocket, but at the end of the day, it's a self-fulfilling, self-gratifying, like this. I mean, I did this.
And when I look back at the stuff I did, I'm so proud of it. Like, I'm so proud of the movie I made in 2015 called Troy Trolson. And we got this guy to put on we got a Hollywood makeup person to make him into like a troll or whatever. And he's like a hipster, and he's trying to get this girl that doesn't like him, and he's riding his bike and he gets beat up by the cops, and all this stuff happens. And it's just like, people watched it and they're like, oh, I don't get it. But wait 10 years, you'll get it. You know what I mean? I don't know. But I watch it now and I'm just like, oh my God, I'm so proud that 10 years ago me was able to pull his resources together and make a vision that will continue to be there even after I'm gone. You know what I mean? On some level, it's like, you got to express yourself in like such a abstract way. And you know what I mean? And it's just, to me, so well like performed by the actors, and the cinematography and everything just came together on it. And then, but it wasn't, that one didn't get into any film fests, you know, and I entered it in like Sundance, I think, you know what I mean? Because you always going to go for Sundance. Right? And then I made another one in 2016 called The Rideshare, which was actually fundamentally way better than Troy Trolson, but I'm super proud of that too. And that one got into the Las Vegas Film Fest, and then I went to it at the Palms Theater, and it was packed. And I was not ready for this. I was like thinking it was a small film fest, and I didn't really know or whatever. And firstly, I didn't know that I was going to have to talk afterwards, so I had nothing prepared. And
Derek Olson, you're like, oh shit, I'm gonna go on stage.
But the thing that happened is probably one of the most fulfilling things that's ever happened to me. And there was 500 people in the audience, and I'm just making that number up, but it was the Palms Theater. It's like an IMAX type theater, full like elevated seating, and every seat was full. And there's like a lot of subtle humor in it, because I've got this kind of like dry, wry sense of humor that I work into my creative work. And people got every single little bit. And every time I showed someone that they would individually like watch it on a computer, they would get some of the jokes, but a lot of them would be flying over their head. But because there was a whole crowd of people, nothing was flying over anybody's heads, and they were laughing at the little bits like they were just full on jokes. And I was just like, wow, these people are like really getting it. And there's just no better feeling. And even though it was like let's say Ron Howard, you know, he can experience that, and then he can know that it's happening at 4,000 other theaters simultaneously. Mine was happening only in one place, but it felt like
one audience.
If it was in 4,000, you know what I mean, people would be getting it or something like that. You know, like it was the first time I was just like, okay, I'm getting to the point where I'm good enough at this that I'm like really fooling people into thinking I'm a filmmaker or that I know how to make films, you know? And so much of it was just experimentation in the beginning, and like your idea of what you think a film should be like is different, you know what I mean, you've discovered, than what a film really should be like. And going through all the, you know, pain and suffering of making like 12 films on the way to this one that ends up being good. And so now I feel like after that experience, I'm like, you know what, from now on, like I'm actually just a good filmmaker now. You know? And that was the thing that I felt like was the evidence turning point I needed to believe in myself or whatever, you know.
That's awesome. So a couple questions here just to wrap things up. What projects you got on the horizon? Anything you're working on coming up that you want to tease to the people?
Well, right now I created my own animated series, and it's, I made like 38 minutes of content that I put out on YouTube in like episodic format. But then I was looking at it, I'm like, nobody's watching these from 1 to 10. They're watching like episode 3, or, you know, they'll watch episode 7. Yeah. And so they're like, you know, this is a really good idea, but if you could just connect the stories, I'm like, hey, bro, watch all 10. You realize they're connected. And so I'm like, you know what? I've already connected these, so I'm going to turn these into a pilot instead. And I did eliminate a couple of the storylines because I had like so many storylines. And because it was like 38 minutes of content, I cut down that to like 22 minutes. Yeah. And I'm like, you know what? I feel that just knowing what I know about writing pilots, because when you write a pilot, you have to introduce the characters, but you have to make people care about the characters. You have to have an A and B story. Yeah. And all these things have to, and you have to have the through line that says, this is what makes this a show. Right. Yeah. And I just felt like afterwards, like it all came together. And one of my things I always wanted to do was to write a pilot and have it like be made. But that requires millions of dollars, and you have to get yeses from the gatekeepers and da 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 da. And so I'm like, you know what? Through the teaching myself to animate, like I can write the script and then make the thing and have it exist as a piece, without having to ask permission or get someone's blessing or be born into a rich family or all these things I have no control over. You know? So
that's what's nice about YouTube now. You can create it and just put it out there.
Right. And I feel most proud of this. I feel like this is the best like piece of content in one thing that I've made by myself, like through my creative career, of like the Derek Olson stuff, you know, Derek Olson joint or whatever. And, but I actually have it like hidden right now because I'm attempting to sell it as an idea. And so I did have it evaluated by Fred Films, which is Fred Siebert, who is a co-founder of MTV, and he's in New York. And I got in an email exchange and they watched it and they turned it down. But
hey, it only takes one yes. That's what I always say.
Right. And truthfully, like if I'm honest, like it's not their vibe, but it's just I knew how to get to them through email by doing research or whatever. So I'm just like, I'm just going to throw it out there and see what happens. And you know what I mean? Like I know it's not their vibe. Right. It's a little different than what they would want, but maybe they'll just, you know, make an exception for me. You know what I mean? So I knew I wasn't sending it to the ideal place or whatever. But the next step is I have one of the actors in it who has an agent and has all this stuff, wants to help me pitch it. Okay. But there's actually a moratorium on pitching right now, at least from what I've heard. I'm in North Dakota. He told me this. So we're taking his word for it. But because of the SAG after strike. So first there was the WGA strike, and I knew we couldn't pitch then, and I found out,
which is the Writers Guild for the people that don't know.
Right, exactly. And so if you were to pitch, that would be seen as like being a scab or whatever. That's not showing solidarity. And of course, I don't like really have any emotional connection to the WGA because I'm not involved. But I'm like, you know what? Screw it, I'll pitch anyway. You know? But he wouldn't, you know. So so I'm just going with him. Yeah. But then I guess it turns out nobody's pitching until after the SAG after strike as well. So I'm like, okay, great. You know, and part of me is like, am I watching my opportunity like run away from me? Yeah. And then the other part of me is like, okay, be patient. Don't, you know, try to force or whatever. And the other thing is now that this is done and complete, so now it's like time to like start the next project.
So you have the pilot done with?
It's done, and it's on YouTube, but it's under like it's unlisted.
It's unlisted, okay.
Yeah, and it's 22 minutes, which still blows my mind to even say that I made a 22-minute animated film all by myself. You know, with my just pen.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I'm super happy with how it turned out. But I do think that like as I was going through the process of creating the 38 minutes that turned into the 22 minutes, I was improving. Yeah. So there's certain things that are in the pilot that are from earlier in the process that I'm like, I kind of want to redo it, but then it's like, I know how much work it is to redo it. So I'm just like, I'm just going to let it live, because ultimately I'm like, you know, if we're going to really make the show, I'm not going to be making it by my hand anyways. You know, we're going to have a team and we'll probably redo all this stuff. So this is just to show you what the idea is, I guess. Cool.
No, that's awesome. And hopefully the people will see it one day, whether it's, then listed on YouTube and they can find it, or you sell it to some sort of company that maybe you can get the chance at redoing it
right
with a full animation team.
It's
and
always
not just you with a pen.
Right, exactly. And it's always been very hard for me not to show something.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is too, I know that as filmmakers, like we have to really go through all the revision process before we show it off.
Yeah.
And so I know that I've in the past been guilty of showing an incomplete work. And then for people that aren't creatives, a lot of times they, in their mind, that's the complete work. And you can't come back and show them the complete work later and have them erase from their mind what they saw earlier.
Beforehand.
Yep. So it's like you have one shot at showing somebody something. So yeah, that's
like, hey, this is half done. What do you think?
Right.
Like,
and then, or people are like, oh, show me what you got so far.
Yeah.
Like I would do that because I know that it's in the process and you know that it's going to bake further.
Yeah.
But other people that don't have the background, they're just like, oh, well, that sucks.
And you're like, well, I haven't done
no. Let me
this
explain.
part of it. Yeah.
Once I add this and that, and then I do this, it'll be great. Trust me.
Awesome. So Derek, last question I got for you here. Give us your business advice, career advice, maybe a Mount Rushmore, 4 pieces if you had to leave the audience with 4 pieces of advice here.
Okay. So what's the objective of the advice?
Whatever you want it to be. People that can take something actionable. Previously we've had people say, be patient or, lean on mentors, whatever it might be. So maybe whatever you've learned.
So I'll try to go the route of like speaking to maybe the earlier version of myself that had to learn or discover these things, the quote unquote hard way. Right.
Okay.
So one thing I would say is believing in yourself is really paramount. Right. So like you really need to just almost to a delusional extent, just know that you can do it because there's so many ways that you could like thwart your own self by just being like, well, maybe I can't do that. Or maybe, I mean? And sometimes you actually have to walk into situations. I'm sure you've felt this. You have to walk into situations really not knowing what the hell you're going to do, but knowing that you're going to be able to do whatever it is that you need to do to get the thing done.
I always link it to, I'm sure you've seen the movie Dodgeball.
Right.
And they got Pirate Steve. And this is a mindset thing where if you think you are something or can do something, you keep telling yourself that, you can be that. He obviously thinks he's a pirate.
Right.
He keeps calling himself Pirate Steve.
Yeah.
He has a little hiccup in the middle of the movie, spoiler alert, where he, says, I'm not a pirate. And then at the end, he goes back to being Pirate Steve. So if you tell yourself, I'm a pirate or I'm a filmmaker or I'm this, it's going to help in the long run, whatever you tell yourself.
It's so interesting that you brought up that because I feel like I can turn that into my next piece, right? So, for instance, there was this guy who was a grip in Hollywood, and he would, whenever hired, and this might be the basis of that character, actually, whenever hired, he would show up to the show in full pirate regalia, and he would do a pirate thing. And he was like, that was what he was known for, right?
Yeah.
He was the pirate grip, right? And he's like, argh. Yeah, you should. And so,
I need a card.
But what happened was, and I think that my cinematographer teacher told me this. He said every time he was on a set and they need like a grip would like get sick or like drop out or whatever, people would be like, oh crap, like who do we hire? We need a grip. And then someone would be like, oh, what about that pirate guy?
Called Pirate Steve.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the thing about it is what he was doing, whether it was on purpose or not, was he was branding himself.
Yeah.
And he was creating a bigger picture, right? So like, you can be, Bob, or you can be Pirate Bob, right? And who's more memorable? Yeah. Pirate Bob or Bob?
Probably
right?
Pirate Bob. There's a lot of Bobs in the world. I don't know how many Pirate Bobs I know.
And so I think that there's some kind of advice here that I could whittle out of this in that there is a possibility of creating the impression of yourself outside of, maybe what you think about yourself or whatever, and using that in order to establish who you are and what you want to be, right? So what is your brand? Like, I mean, if I were to say like really insecure, I could sit in front of you right now and be like, oh, I don't know, I just made some movies once and I just hope that maybe it'll work out. And that's like, I think, especially being from North Dakota, maybe of our Scandinavian roots or something like that, we have a tendency to want to just be humble and talk, and I definitely had to suffer through a little bit of that too. But I think so the actionable piece of advice is don't do that. Be bigger than yourself, not smaller than yourself.
I like that piece. Going, I'm a filmmaker instead of, oh, I made a couple films and I did this.
Right.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is just like, And so, for instance, I think about this thing called agile methodology, which is from software development.
Okay.
And agile methodology, like one of the things you're going to do is you're going to set a goal for Friday on Monday. And then when Friday comes, you assess whether you met your goal. And then you think about what got in the way of your goal, how you can fix those things. And then you set your next goal, which is the next Friday. And you just go from week to week like that. Instead of, and that's the reason they do that for software development, is because sometimes the project is so massive that you can't mentally conceptualize it. It's just too much, right? So you need to just narrow your perceptions to what's right in front of you and then iterate and build upon.
Yeah.
You know, and I think especially with animation, like that type of mentality really helped me, because if I knew how much work it was when I started, I probably would have never started.
Yeah. But then you find out, kind of like getting into the film industry, when you're buying stuff, you're like, oh, this is a lot more expensive than I thought it was.
Exactly.
Like, I wouldn't have done this if I'd known cameras were this expensive.
But if you just do it little bit by little bit and just keep your, focus on what's next, you'll realize, you look behind you and it's like, I've gone so far, you know, and I would have never taken the first step if I knew how long this road really was, or how difficult this endeavor really is, So you have to kind of have a little bit of naivety, you know what I mean? But also just faith.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. Derek, where can people find you?
I guess
if you want them to find you.
You can find me on Instagram, Derek Olson, DARE_Olson on Instagram, or at Derek Olson. I don't know. I kind of quit using Facebook a while back, so I'm not very easy to reach on there. Mostly Instagram. And I'm going to hopefully, honestly, I want to start doing something more like a podcast.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know.
Well, this is a good conversation.
Now,
maybe we can workshop some sort of film podcast sometime.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah. Anytime.
I'm already doing 3. What's another one?
Right. Yeah. We'll stop in here and make it happen.
There we go. So Dare, I almost called you Dare. So Dare, do people call you Dare?
Some people do.
Okay.
Close friends.
So Derek Dare Olson. Yeah. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
All right. Thank you.
That was episode 64 of the Minot Business Podcast. Again, thank you guys very much for watching, for listening. Please don't forget to rate and review. We are back on the weekly episodes. Thank you for that little hiatus, or sticking with me through that little hiatus. And we will see you guys next week for episode 65.